We're going to get started. Good evening to everyone. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to an important discussion about a very significant book, Immigrant America Portrait, now in its 5th edition, which is quite remarkable because you don't see in academia many books of this caliber that stand the test of time. I mean, the first edition was in 1990, so this book has been around for more than 3 decades, updated with each successive edition. I want to start by thanking Alejandro Portes, of course, one of the co-authors of the book, a professor of law at the University of Miami, a renowned scholar in our College of Arts and Sciences, and the founding director of the Center for Migration and Development at Princeton University. Alejandro is a very prolific scholar. One of the activities I enjoy the most is to participate in the presentations of his books, or a special edition of a journal, or a new conference. And because he's so prolific, I have had that opportunity almost every single year since I've been at the university. So it's really an honor to be in yet another one of your very insightful works. Earlier this week, Professor Portes was one of a dozen luminaries that engaged in a strategic dialogue about migration during the Concordia America Summit, which we convened here at the university just earlier this week. And he was telling me how he was providing fresh information to the mayor of New York, who was part of that panel, and was able to illuminate the mayor. Hopefully that will have an impact. I also want to acknowledge his co-author, Ruben Rumbaut, a distinguished professor of sociology at the University of California, Irvine, and founding chair of the American Sociological Association's International Migration Section. Thank you, Ruben, for being here. And, of course, to Dr. Felicia Knoll, director of the university's Institute for Advanced Study of the Americas, who's going to be moderating tonight's discussion. This 5th edition of Immigrant America, a Portrait, provides a comprehensive and current overview of immigration to the United States, delving into its history, the principal theories explaining its diverse origins, the main types of immigrants, and the various forms of immigrants' incorporation within American society. As an institution devoted to the creation, dissemination, and translation of knowledge, we are very pleased to be able to host you on our campus. And we do so in this city, a city that's renowned for its very rich tapestry of immigrants, of immigrant cultures, which I think does provide a very unique vantage point to discuss the ideas presented in the book. Miami's diverse population, with its own history of immigration and cultural integration, serves as a living example of many of the concepts explored by the authors. And events like this allow the university to fulfill one of its crucial social functions, which is the function of convening, of gathering different people with different perspectives around issues of global significance, such as migration. So we have a very rich program tonight, so without further delay, I will welcome Dr. Knoll to introduce our speakers for this evening. Again, thank you and welcome.
So thank you, President Frank, for those welcome remarks, for always being a part of these events that are so special and integral to us being a hemispheric university. I'm so pleased to welcome you all to the University of Miami's Institute for Advanced Study of the Americas final event of the 2023-24 academic year. And it is especially fitting that this is Professor Alejandro Portes' event, because he has been such an incredible supporter of the university's institute, and also has made our work on migration what it is, truly putting us on the map as a university, as an institute, in work on migration in a way that would only have been possible with him. I'm also very pleased to be able to thank the law school for the support, for co-sponsoring this event, for being a part of our work at the Institute. Dr. Portes has done an incredible amount of work for us, and each time I think, how is it possible that we have so many books that he has put together? And this is the 7th book that we have launched since 2015, 2016 of Professor Portes, and that has enriched our capacity as an institute, has really made us an institute of advanced studies and a truly academic institute. There is no one that comes close to this kind of productivity, and we are truly grateful. As President Frank mentioned, this book launch comes at a particularly opportune time because we just hosted event, the Concordia 2024 Annual Americas event, which was incredibly successful, and Professor Portes had a very important role in that event and made sure that migration and this city was truly embedded in what was being discussed, and of course in the political context, the context of movement, the context of migration, the context of people who are walking, millions and millions of people who are walking around our world and suffering as they walk. That is what this work is helping us to think about and to ensure that is a better future for migrants in next generations. I also want to make sure to mention that the covers are something very special and that the artist is sitting right here. Javier is right here with us. Cortada is right here with us. I understand there are many things to congratulate him for, but I think that there's something very special about this cover. You said it, we were just speaking about it. It's the idea that these are mangroves. Mangroves in South Florida are so important as protection, but also the way that the roots penetrate the ground. Talk about community, talk about stability, talk about holding us all together. And so, each cover of the book, and you've done almost every one of them, the books you've launched, has something special, but this is truly, has a kind of meaning that I think is particularly important in the world in which we are in today. I also get to thank our provost, Willie Prado, because he was tremendously open and very generous in supporting this initiative, providing us with the budget and the support and saying there is no doubt this absolutely must happen and making it possible. And to our staff who are here somewhere, Michael Graybiel, Jeff Farmer, Dory Ahern is outside, and Francis Jerez, who do so much work behind the scenes to make this possible. I'm very grateful to all who are here, and of course, in particular, and as President Frank mentioned, to Ruben Rumbaut, now that I know how to pronounce the name properly. Did I do it properly? Thank you. That you're here and joining us today for 34 years of this book, a lifetime. I am going to moderate light. I want to tell you about the speakers that we have today, and I'll let them all come up here on stage and be able to speak. We have a tight timeline. Each are going to take 12 to 15 minutes, and then we hope to have a few moments for quick Q&A from the audience, and I'll come back up for that. So first, and I'll ask you just to come forward. First speaking will be Professor and co-author Ruben Rumbaut. Professor Rumbaut is the Distinguished Professor of Sociology in the School of Social Sciences at the University of California, Irvine, and he will speak on a protracted journey, 5 editions of Immigrant America since 1990. Following Professor Rumbaut will be a commentary from Professor William Haller. Professor Haller is Professor of Sociology in the College of Behavioral, Social, and Health Sciences at Clemson University. And next, we'll have commentary from our very own Professor Rebecca Becky Sharpless, who is a professor of law at the University of Miami School of Law and founding director of our very successful and important immigration clinic. And then, of course, we will hear from the maestro himself, from Professor Portes, concluding remarks, and will take us through this journey, a time of challenge for immigration to America. In addition, of course, to what you know of him as an academic and an academic leader, I want to share that he has also been a leader in making sure that our Institute for Advanced Study of the Americas thrives and goes forward in so many different ways as a member of our External Advisory Committee. So I'm going to let you all come up, please, and take your spaces, and I'll let you take the microphone, beginning with Professor Rumbaut, and then I'll come back for the Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, President Frank and Director Knoll, and all of you who are here for this occasion. It's been a long time since I've last been in Miami, but it is especially meaningful for me to be here because my own improbable journey from Havana to Immigrant America began in Miami, not far from here, so very long ago. Alejandro and I never imagined when we began work on this book in 1985 that we would go on to write 5 editions, 1 per decade, each striving to keep up with a permanently unfinished society transformed by immigrants who would themselves be transformed in the process. I would have been stunned to learn that our study of the odysseys of millions of newcomers from all over the world to the United States would itself become an odyssey, and a permanently unfinished book at that. Back then, in a decade marked by growing flows of legal immigrants, mostly from non-European countries, by the Mariel boat lift, historic highs in refugee resettlement, notably from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, in the aftermath of the nation's then longest war, tens of thousands of escapees from wars in Central America who were denied refugee status in the context of the Cold War, and the passage of IRCA in 1986, which included an unprecedented legalization of formerly undocumented immigrants, mostly from Mexico, it had become clear that a U-turn had taken place in American immigration history. Not long before, in 1970, the US Census had found that the foreign-born population of the United States accounted for only 4.7% of the total population, the lowest proportion since 1850, when it first recorded the country of birth of US residents. Already then, we had been systematically studying the phenomenon for years. Indeed, we had lived it, but could not foresee just how unfinished this society was, or how transformed it would become, or how dramatically the larger world would change. What was missing was an effort to pull together the many strands of our available knowledge about these matters and to offer a synthesis of its major aspects that was both comprehensive and comprehensible. 4 decades and 4 editions later, we have continued to bring this extraordinary story up to date, but one that has grown in complexity and controversy. Each new edition has had to assess demographic trends and immigration flows, but also to grapple with entirely unanticipated events from the local to the global level, which impact the social, economic, political, and cultural development of American society, as well as the incorporation of its newest members and the reasons and the reactions of natives and of nativists toward them. Over the course of our writing, we have witnessed countries that ceased to exist, including the Soviet Union, and many others that came into being. We've witnessed the end of the Cold War, an era of economic restructuring, widening inequality, and mass incarceration, a Great Recession, new spasms of nativism and xenophobia, the attacks of September 11, the beginning and end of the longest war in US history in Afghanistan, the Iraq War and a forever war on terror, the creation of a Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and CPB, the punitive turn in immigration policy, the political paralysis of comprehensive immigration reform, the detention and deportation of millions, the fate of the dreamers, the desperate odysseys of asylum seekers, the explosive growth of the world's forcibly displaced populations, more than 110 million people as of last year, by far the most since UNHCR started counting after World War II, a once-in-a-century global pandemic that in 2020 brought international migration virtually to a halt, and the most serious threat to American democracy since the Civil War. History does not repeat itself, but it echoes. From today's vantage, we see that more immigrants arrived in the half-century from 1970 to 2020 than did during the full century from the 1820s to the 1920s. Census data show that the foreign-born population doubled from 1970 to 1990 to 20 million, then doubled again by 2010 to 40 million, and then increase more slowly to 44.5 million by 2017. By that time, 44.5 million was 13.7% of the US population, at which point it plateaued from 2017 to 2019, reflecting the policies of the Trump administration, from Muslim bans and zero-tolerance family separations to the decimation of the refugee resettlement program. And then it dropped in both size and share for the first time in 50 years in the annus horribilis of 2020, the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. Still today, the immigrant stock of the United States, that is the first and second generations of immigrants and their US-born children, numbers about 84 million people. That's over a quarter of the total population, overwhelmingly of Latin American and Asian origins, whose descendants will reshape the contours of American society. All the while, we have kept tab on the hardships and triumphs of immigrants and refugees and their children, who have not only contributed variously and even vitally to their adoptive country, but have been and will continue to be the principal drivers of the growth of the American population and labor force. Along the way, we added entirely new chapters on the new second generation, on religion, history, theory, immigration policies, while expanding and updating core chapters on patterns of settlement, education, occupation, entrepreneurship, naturalization and political participation, transnationalism and assimilation, identity and emergent ethnicities, acculturation and mental health, linguistic diversity, and bilingualism. Immigrants are not a homogeneous population. The current diversity surpasses that of the great European waves of a century ago, not only in their national and cultural origins, but notably in their class backgrounds. The most educated and the least educated groups in American society today are immigrants. And immigrants are found at both ends of the occupational structure and the economic spectrum, a reflection of polar opposite types of migrations, contexts of exit and reception, including government policies, and the progressive bifurcation of the American economy in the post-industrial era. To get an analytical handle on this complexity, we identify main types of immigrants and then followed their patterns of settlement and modes of incorporation in the American economy, polity, society, and culture. After the 1965 repeal of the national origins quota laws that had been in effect since 1924, Immigrant America changed profoundly, if unexpectedly. The human drama of the story remains riveting, but the cast of characters and their circumstances have changed in complex ways. While immigrants come from over 200 countries and territories, most, around 60%, come from just 10. In 1970, the US foreign-born population was dominated by Canadians, I'm looking at Felicia, and Europeans, Italy, Germany, the UK, Poland, the Soviet Union. Only Mexico, and for the first time, Cuba made the top 10 in 1970. By 1980, 6 of the top 10 were still Canadians and Europeans. By 1990, 4 of the 10. By 2000, 2 of the 10. And ever since then, the top 10 all come from Latin America and Asia: Mexico, India, China, the Philippines, El Salvador, Vietnam, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Korea. In 1990 and 2000, the top 2 foreign-born populations came from Mexico and the Philippines. In 2010 and 2020, the top 2 were Mexico and India, with the Mexican share declining since the Great Recession. And while immigrants come to all 50 states, most are concentrated in a handful. By 1990, 1/3 of the total foreign-born population of the US resided in one state, California. The 80s were a transformative decade for California. I've had a front row seat to its history. Today, California is still home to 27% of all immigrants in the United States. More than 1/4 of the state's population is foreign-born, a greater proportion than any other state. And more than half of its nearly 40 million residents consist of immigrants and their US-born children. Indeed, Southern California is home to the largest concentrations of Mexicans, Salvadorans, Guatemalans, Filipinos, Cambodians, Koreans, Vietnamese, Taiwanese, Iranians, and other nationalities outside of their respective countries of origin. Most of the largest immigrant nationalities in the US today have established their primary enclaves in greater Los Angeles. When I moved to UC Irvine 2 decades ago, my bilingual 8-year-old son and I stopped at a Starbucks near campus. He had heard nothing but Spanish when we went to Home Depot and other stores. But now he heard strange languages. I told him that some students were speaking Chinese, others Korean or Vietnamese. He sipped on his hot chocolate for a moment and said, "Papi, I don't think anyone in California was born in the United States." Now, things were different in 1910 at the height of European immigration, when nearly 15% of the US population was foreign-born. Of all those millions of immigrants then, 25% spoke English as their mother tongue. They came mainly from Ireland, Great Britain, and Canada. After English came German. 20% spoke German, followed by Italian, 10%, then Yiddish, Polish, and other European languages. Spanish was far behind them all. As mass European immigration waned over the subsequent decades, so did linguistic diversity. By 1970, English was still the language spoken by the largest number of immigrants, again, chiefly from Canada, the UK, and Ireland. That year likely marked the end of the most linguistically homogeneous era in US history. And by then, the US had earned a dubious reputation as a language graveyard. But by 1980, for the first time, a non-English language, Spanish, surpassed English as the language spoken by more immigrants than any other. Spanish is now far and away the most widely spoken non-English language in the United States. Today, 42 million Spanish speakers make up 13.5% of the total population of the United States and nearly 2/3 of all the 71 million non-English speakers. However, fluency in non-English languages declines over the generations. We have shown that for all groups without exception, proficiency and preference for English is well established by the second generation and entirely dominant by the third, with fluent bilingualism rapidly atrophying. What is novel now is that bilingualism is positively associated with educational, occupational, and economic attainment among those youths who have managed to maintain their linguistic skills despite strong assimilative pressures. Which brings me to the new second generation. Much of our work over the decades, beginning with the first edition, back before there was an internet or email or personal computers or iPhones, and we used a typewriter and long-distance calls to get that first edition out. But since then, most of our work over the decades involved poring over a vast research literature, as well as analyzing national and regional data from the decennial censuses, official statistics, and large-scale surveys. But in 1980, the census, in its inimitable wisdom, eliminated the questions on parental nativity which it had asked since 1870. And as a result, it became impossible to collect data on the second generation from the nation's principal data set. To fill the dearth of available data, we launched the Children of Immigrants Longitudinal Study, or CILS, based on representative samples drawn in 1991 of over 5,000 young people enrolled in the 8th and 9th grades in San Diego and South Florida schools whose parents had come from dozens of countries. And we then followed those young people into adulthood. Our results detailed their diverse mobility paths and trajectories to adulthood, theorized as a process of segmented assimilation. CILS became the centerpiece of a chapter on the new second generation, which we added to our book, updating our findings from the second edition to the 5th that was just published this month. We also published 2 companion books based on CILS, Legacies and Ethnicities. When in 2002, in the same month that I took my son to that Starbucks in Irvine, we received the Best Book Award of the American Sociological Association for Legacies, which we had dedicated to our children, our legacies. I noted for the record that we not only study children of immigrants, we make them. And that's the ultimate in participant observation. As long-term participant observers of immigration, we have seen changes cascade, not trickle, in each of the preceding decades. But while Immigrant America continues to change, as does the world that spawns it, the goal that originally inspired this book remains the same: to make reasoned sense of complex and controversial issues and to make our living portrait of Immigrant America broadly accessible. All the more urgent today in our highly charged and polarized moment, with immigration a white-hot issue of political debate and depicted from powerful pulpits in the xenophobic discourse of demagogues, poisoning the blood of our country, and of fact-free conspiracy theories rife with stereotype, aiming to frame immigrants as threats. From the first edition to this newest one, we hope our book has served and will continue to serve as a fact-filled challenge to those nativist views and as a stimulus to gain additional knowledge and insights about the newest members of this society, and increasingly about the generations of their children and grandchildren who will shape the future. Thank you very much. William Haller will follow me. Well, if you prefer to sit with the microphone, whatever.
Yeah, perhaps I'll stand. Hello. When we were just talking previously about another book, Ruben used the very adjective that I was going to use to describe the 5th edition of Immigrant America: monumental. And the previous editions have been a companion and a resource to me for over 25 years, across the time that I've been collaborating actively with Professor Portis and to a lesser extent with Professor Rumbaut. And essentially, it's the various editions have, as I've worked on the research projects of Children of Immigrants Longitudinal Study and perhaps a few others, have spared me from having to ask questions that thinking back, I suppose I would consider to be somewhat sophomoric. But overall, the chapters that I read thoroughly in this new 5th edition, it is very much reworked. Most of the narrative about the history of U.S. immigration is rooted in the demographic trends, and these begin in the 1880s, what I would say about the different discussions about nativism and the history of nativism in the United States are I find to be very much to the point, and if perhaps they had begun with the origins of nativism in the United States as a socio-political culture and had gone back into perhaps the 1840s, I might have had a few nuggets to share with them, but I have just some short ones that I hope you'll indulge me with, and this is from a project that I was asked to participate in called Lincoln's Unfinished Work. And I was encouraged to look at Abraham Lincoln's views on immigration, and what I found was quite astonishing to me. And so Lincoln certainly had his difficulties that by today's standards, but Lincoln wrote in the 1850s about the Know Nothing movement, which was the nativist movement of the time. And in his 1855 letter to his friend Joshua Speed, he wrote, "I am not a know-nothing, that is certain. How could I be? As a nation, we began by declaring that all men are created equal. We now practically read it, all men are created except African Americans. When the know-nothings get control, it will read, all men are created equal except African Americans and foreigners and Catholics." He continues, "When it comes to this, I should prefer emigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty, to Russia, for instance, where despotism can be taken pure and without the base alloy of hypocrisy." Historians have sometimes dismissed this passage by saying that this was in his private correspondence. And actually, he was on public record prior to this when he was running for state legislature in Illinois. And the historian that I drew from said, as he was preparing for running for the seat, an anti-Nebraska Whig, a committee of self-styled Native Americans, interviewed Lincoln to determine whether he merited their endorsement. A member of that committee subsequently recalled that during the interview, Lincoln reminded his interrogators of the fate suffered by the original Native Americans, the indigenous population of the continent. He said to the know-nothings, "We pushed them from their homes, and now we turn upon others not fortunate enough to have come over as early as we or our forefathers." Coming from the 1850s, I find that extraordinary. My readings of Higham, Handlin, some of the other immigration historians say that I take it that the United States seems to go through anti-immigrant flare-ups every few generations, and we've experienced perhaps one of the very worst of those in recent years. When I read through the closing chapter on competing ideologies of immigration, the idea in my head was competing ideologies in terms of them being competing in a head-to-head kind of way, and in my mind, an ideology has to congeal into some kind of political movement to be an ideology. But I've been doing some additional thinking since then about that, and I think that we have coexisting ideologies. One which is this ideology of intransigent nativism de jure, the de jure ideology, and then there's the de facto ideology of the American melting pot and of assimilation and of monolingualism and so on and so forth. The ideology de facto was never a particularly good fit, and I wouldn't say that it's particularly healthy. But the ideology de jure that we've all witnessed in recent years has been absolutely horrific. I do agree with the authors in concluding on a positive note that the United States will come through this. There will be brighter times ahead, and I don't know why I'm such a persistent optimist in that regard, but I am convinced that we are very much greater together.
Good evening. I'm Becky Sharpless from the law school. Alex, thank you for being such a great colleague and inviting me to be part of tonight. You probably know that both Ruben and Alex are legends in the sociology world, but you may not know they're also legends, actually, in the improv, immigration professor world, where they are both very well known and very, very well read. So I am particularly honored to be part of tonight. So thank you for the opportunity to comment on this book. It's become rightly, I think, known as the foundational sociological text on Immigrant America. And as both Alex and Ruben acknowledge, the topic of Immigrant America is in constant flux. In their words, permanently unfinished. Immigrant America has certainly, quote, grown in complexity and controversy, and it is fitting that there have been 5 editions then, and I look forward to the next ones in the coming years. I don't know how many more are planned. I guess this might be the last one. The book delivers on its promise, a portrait of Immigrant America. The work is truly encyclopedic, grounded in fascinating, sometimes niche facts and histories. For example, who knew that Finnish loggers and miners in the Midwest were historically divided between the meek church Finns and the militant red Finns? Fascinating. I learned so much. At the same time, the book offers a wealth of data in well-sourced tables and graphs, but it also delivers sweeping analyses and conclusions. There is truly something for everyone, every type of reader, from general and policy readers to historical and sociological ones. I deeply appreciate how the authors ground their analysis in the reality of how assimilation, in quotation marks, occurs. In our current day reality of exaggerated discourse around immigrants and immigration, the author's purpose of dissecting the disconnect between public perceptions and underlying realities is more needed than ever before. As they explain, new people don't just transform into people who are as American as everyone else. Rather, people first affirm their national and cultural characteristics, building political power within ethnic enclaves, then eventually in mainstream politics. This process is in no way alarming, but is how it has always been. The American public has just forgotten. Similarly, as the authors note, our country may today appear, in their words, fragmented, but this was our country's reality in the past as well. It isn't enforced cultural homogeneity, but rather strong democratic institutions, which I'm still hopeful about as well, that have held us together. But like every reader, I bring my own perspective to the book as a professor and an immigration lawyer. And so today I'm going to pick out some themes that intersect with my focus in my work on this country's massive deportation infrastructure and on people who have lived in the US for a long time but now face deportation, usually because of a criminal record. As the authors point out, the US has, over the last decades, built a massive, absolutely massive, criminal carceral system unlike any other in the world. And despite efforts to scale it back, no other nation comes close. But also, as the authors point out, immigrants are far less likely to become involved in the criminal justice system than others, but that after the second generation, this gap disappears. They write, the longer immigrants have resided in the US, the higher their incarceration rates. So Americanization can lead to downward, in their words, assimilation and greater risks of involvement with the criminal justice system. The authors expressly focus on the first and second generations of the, quote, immigrant stock of the US, which they describe as overwhelmingly of Latin American and Asian origins. But many of the book's themes and analyses apply, I think, with equal force to Black immigrants from the Caribbean and Africa. particularly with respect to their insights on detention and deportation. And this point is important because as we all know, I think, Black immigrants are more criminalized and therefore more likely to find themselves caught up in the criminal justice system and then deportation system. Popular books like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow have mainstreamed our understanding of the harms of mass criminal incarceration. Parallel to this racial justice critique, immigration professors, and I count myself among them, have mounted racial justice critiques of our country's vast machinery of detention and deportation, all of which has a disproportionate effect on Black immigrants who, as I said earlier, are more likely to be targeted and end up in jail. And then once in jail, jurisdictions that are not sanctuary cities or welcoming cities, including Miami, by the way, as we all know so well, ICE gets an alert whenever anyone's in a jail and lodges what's called an ICE detainer, asking the jail to hold the person beyond the close of their criminal case. Over the last decades, with increasing intensity, we have built a literal pipeline from our jails and prisons to ICE detention and deportation. With my students in the immigration clinic, we visit people who have been caught up in this pipeline. As the authors point out, including in a graph that really packs a punch if you look at it on page 41, deportations remained relatively low and steady until the mid-90s, when they started ramping up, rising from 50,000 in 1995 to over 400,000 in 2009 under the Obama administration. The authors correctly recognize the creation of a vast network of immigrant detention centers and historic deportation levels. So I recently published a narrative nonfiction book, very different from the book we're talking about tonight, but also by the University of California Press. I think we'll give them a shout out. And it's a book about a story that I think illuminates our nation's massive deportation infrastructure. For over a decade, the federal government's department that deports people, called ICE Air, has contracted with private air carriers and special ops officers to deport by the plane load people, predominantly men, predominantly Black men. And even when nothing goes wrong, people remain shackled at their hands, to their waists, at their ankles for half a day. But when something does go wrong, they are shackled and immobilized in an airplane seat for much longer. My book tells the story of 92 refugees on a failed deportation flight who were shackled for 2 days before the plane turned around and returned to the US, landing in Miami. We as a society have normalized brute force measures like routine shackling and long periods of detention, even for civil violations. And when we look internationally, we see that no other country, especially those whom we like to compare ourselves to, has chosen this extreme dehumanizing path. But the authors do more than just point to our vast deportation machinery by showing that Americanization increases a person's chances of being arrested. The authors engage with a view of crime that is, I think, nuanced and structural, rather than a simple one that emphasizes morality and individual responsibility. This nuance supports what immigration professors and practitioners call crimmigration, criminal immigration, crimmigration critiques, which point out the harms and limitations of a narrative for immigration reform that relies on the good-bad immigrant distinction, a distinction rejected by most progressive theorists of racial justice. This so-called politics of respectability is problematic because it depends on a contrast with an out or deviant group. A person is respectable and deserving by virtue of a contrast with someone who is not. So the claim to respectability reinforces and reproduces social and economic inequalities, and they also construct them. So if immigration reforms are limited to helping only respectable immigrants, they will never fully address societal inequities. The focus on respectability translates into only limited solutions based on individual reformation and thwarts policy changes grounded in an understanding of the connections among criminality, racism, and social and economic inequality. It's this focus on the structural rather than the individual that comes through, I think, in the book. The authors encourage us to understand the broader context in which immigrants make their choices, choices which are often constrained, choices about where to live, what jobs to take, and whether to learn English. The authors speak of the importance of the modes in which immigrants are incorporated and the resulting material and moral resources made available by governments, the labor market, and their own co-ethnic communities. By these lights, the solution to struggling immigrant groups, particularly the second and third generations on which they focus, must look beyond individual interventions with at-risk young people and toward solutions that erase prejudice, poverty, and inequality. I'd like to close by addressing, for a short moment, the book's class analysis, which we haven't talked about yet. An analysis that I think runs from cover to cover, but is most prominent in the author's discussions of the effect of post-industrial society on immigrant advancement. The historical pyramid that we know about of increasingly desirable jobs available to low-income people, including immigrants, has shifted to an hourglass in which the largely white native elite are at the unreachable top, and the lower classes, including new poor immigrants, are trapped at the expansive bottom. This is the bifurcated economy that Ruben was talking about. Class analysis also figures into the author's account of how deindustrialization produced a marginalized white working class and how that economic redundancy transformed them into populist nativists, incorrectly targeting immigrants rather than white elites as the source of the problem. Class, then, for the authors, appears primary, even primary, I think, over nativism, although we can talk about that. They write, racial ideology is employed less to legitimize the privileges of a racial or cultural group over another than to sustain the separation between two segments of the working class and to fragment organizations based on class solidarity. Put another way, nativism is a tool for white elites to get richer because an organized and militant labor force becomes useless to a capitalist firm. In other words, nativism keeps the labor force divided. My final comment, true final comment, is simply to note that the nature of nativism and prejudice may not be simple. They may be products of multiple factors, forces, and histories, but the success of the book in no way hinges on the degree to which nativism and prejudice can be explained by simply a class analysis. The impressive richness of Immigrant America lies instead, I think, in its multiplicity of facts, insights, and true stories. It is absolutely worth the read.
Well, it is a commonplace to say that you cannot judge a book by its cover. In our case, we would like our book to be judged by its cover. I think that it is a splendid cover, and one for which we are deeply thankful to the author, artist in residence of Dade County, Javier Cortada. And actually, we selected the cover not only because of its beauty, but because of the legend that it was with it. It's called Our Community. It is like a mangrove forest. And that has a lot of allusions, including to the fact that communities grow, immigrant communities can grow that way, but in the context of South Florida and in the context of the climate emergency that we're coming close to reach, a mangrove, and what mangroves is, and a mangrove forest is particularly relevant. So we are happy and proud that this fifth, probably last edition of Immigrant America is adorned by the cover by Javier Cortada. Thank you very much. The publication of this fifth edition coincides with an unusually challenged situation in the United States, as my predecessors here have noticed, and also in Western European countries. This situation has come about as a result of a confrontation of two major social forces. First, the caravans marching through Mexico, like the hundreds of migrants trying to make their way to Europe across the Mediterranean, reflect, in our view, a qualitatively different situation in sending countries of what is generically called the Global South. That situation corresponds in turn to the operation of two forces. One, we would like to call the rise of relative deprivation in these countries of the Global South, confronted with a widening gap between the opportunities that their countries can offer and the standards of living and opportunities in the advanced world. Everyone today, in every country, in the most remote villages, everyone has access to a portable phone, and even in the most remote villages. And with it, full knowledge of the life conditions and occupational opportunities in the advanced West. Added to this is the implosion of a number of states in the Global South that find themselves unable to enforce the rule of law or provide in a minimal, basic way for their impoverished populations. Haiti, Venezuela, Somalia, and Sudan, to name a few of these countries, provide examples. Meanwhile, in the receiving countries, things have taken a decisively menacing tone, as referred to by the prior speakers tonight. In the United States in particular, the emergence of right-wing nativist populism now threatens the viability and continuity of democratic institutions and is set resolutely against immigration and the foreign population already living in the country. As I described in a prior essay, American right-wing populism did not emerge out of confrontation with migrants, but initially as an aftermath of the so-called Great U-turn, the Great U-turn that saw the country deindustrialize in the 1970s and 1980s in order to transfer industrial production to China and other countries, and else in order to meet competition in automobiles and other durable goods from countries like Japan and Germany. The outcome of this great U-turn at the level of political economy was the demise of the largely native white industrial working class and the relegation of its members to a precarious hold in the new bifurcated service economy that replaced the all-industrial labor market in America. But as happens always in history, it took time. It takes time for these events in the political economy of the nation to translate themselves into politics. It's not an instant process. It takes time from the 1970s and 90s, but when they finally coalesce into a transformation into the politics of the country, they come out with a vengeance. Among other things, national populism that came out of that great U-turn in the 70s and 80s, embodied in the Tea Party and in movements like Numbers USA, was responsible for blocking 4 successive attempts at immigration reform in Congress during both the Bush and the Obama administrations, relegating millions of people of what is called to a life in the shadows that still exists today. That is, those 12 million undocumented immigrants are still with us. They have not simply died down or disappeared. They are still here. And then the same nativist populist movement worked to elect Donald Trump to the presidency. Immigration and the undocumented foreign population have become targets of this nativist fury, changing it from the origins of their situation in the deindustrialization of the country. But now they become immigrants become targets of nativist fury with a slogan like, "Whose country is this anyway? Whose country is this anyway? And what do you understand? You don't understand about being illegal." Hurdle at the immigrants. Pressing native white hegemony that is maintaining white hegemony has become the overriding concern for the radical right into this anti-immigrant situation. These two enormous forces, one rooted in the clash between the global South and North, the other on the rise of national populism, are now facing each other across the Atlantic with focal points in the Mediterranean, not only here in the Mediterranean, and in the US southern border. Migrants continue their determined effort to access life in the advanced countries at any cost, while right-wing forces continue to seek to stop them and deport them in mass, as Peggy Charles noted in her intervention. Since 2023, right-wing governors in the American southern borders have implemented a busing program to transport asylum seekers at the border to northern cities governed by more progressive administrations. This busing program, implemented by Governors Abbott, DeSantis, and others, have turned the asylum-seeking drama at the border into a national one, with penniless and clueless migrants now wandering the streets of Chicago, New York, and Denver in the midst of winter, depending on public and private charity for survival. The political consequences of this drama are immense. It has been turned into a national drama, not only a border drama, a national one, precisely because of the busing program that have affected key cities in the north, such as New York, Chicago, and Denver. The border and immigration have become a major issue, if not the issue, in the forthcoming presidential elections, with consequences that will decide the future of the country and certainly of Immigrant America. A victory for the nativist right wing will probably do away with the governmental and judicial institutions that have made possible in the past the paced process of incorporation of millions of immigrants for more than a century, as Professor Rumbaut noted, and would usher in its place a ruthless campaign of deportation, not only for recent asylum seekers, but even for the older, now established undocumented population across the country, including their children, the so-called dreamers, which are still in the shadows. Nothing has changed. This is a chapter that remains to be written. And that situation that we see today is the reason why we could not conclude this 5th edition of our book on a fully optimistic note. We just couldn't. These are troubling times for this nation of immigrants in which second, third, and even fourth generation descendants of earlier migrants often rally against the more recent newcomers and display no compassion for their plight. On the other hand, perhaps it is possible that the nation will come to its senses, that its institutions will prevail, and that continuity rather than rupture and the end of democracy will mark the future of the nation. Certainly, we fervently hope that that will be the case, and along with it, the continuation of the process of incorporation of immigrants that had been so successful in the history of the nation and turn it into the leader of the democratic world. A final consideration is that the present situation of the vast population living in the shadows, the undocumented population, including its children, added to the plight and suffering of tens of thousands of asylum seekers, cannot continue. It cannot continue. Something must be done in order to restore order and reason to the process of immigration and immigrant incorporation in America. The final chapter of our book advances some concrete proposals that we believe may go a long way toward achieving this crucial goal for the future. Thank you very much.
What a rich, motivational, and on-time set of commentaries and discussions for the book. So that means that we do have a couple of minutes for questions, discussion, commentaries, thoughts with our audience participants who have stayed with us quite late at night to make this possible. Please. I can barely see you from the lights, so assume that you're raising your hands. We never have time before wine and cheese for Q&A. Come on, please.
This is the topic of the 6th not-to-be-written edition, but I think a really important one. And that is artificial intelligence. And what is artificial intelligence going to do to our sense of identity, to the workforce, and to how we behave? We're looking at a new way of being. We're looking at digital species cohabitating as digital companions who can do things that we as people and our workforce does. And I'm just wondering if we could just, the technology of this planet is transforming faster than anything. It can fold proteins, it can imagine things and think in ways that humans can't. And I'm just thinking, where do we as a nation go with this advent of new ways of being? Imagine digital companions that think and do for you, at the same time that we have climate causing the kind of food scarcity and with it, xenophobia that comes as people are trying and clamoring. I'm just concerned about what a 6th edition would look like in America, giving climate and artificial intelligence.
This is such a cool question. Would R2-D2 be an immigrant or not? That's really the question. Does R2-D2 need a passport? Can we take, if there's one other comment or question, then we can respond to 2. Please, I think I saw a hand. Did I? Please. Jeff, I think middle row.
Don't be shy.
Did I not? It's like a bidding war where you think that someone's raised their hand but have not.
Hi, I'd love to hear their thoughts.
Also, could you just tell us who you are?
Oh, sure. Adriana Machado with the Bria Institute here in Miami and a former U parent. So happy to be here. I would love to hear how this book fits into the Institute's future plans too, and if you're envisioning new activities based on this 5th edition of the book.
Thank you. Okay. R2-D2 climate first.
AI,
Please.
Is this working?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Javier, I'm not sure. It's not working?
It was.
It's hard for me to hear it. Now I can hear it better. I'm not sure I can give you a satisfying answer, first with respect to the 6th edition. TBA. However, when you talk about artificial intelligence, let's set aside for a moment the climate issue, which is arguably, those two are jaw-dropping, previews of coming attraction, shall we say. A close, late friend of ours, especially good friend of mine, Ari Zolberg, some years ago wrote a book called A Nation by Design. It was his magnus opus. In it, he took a historical view, and so that you know, Bill, not just back to the 1840s and the Know-Nothing movement, but to the colonial period. And he sought to explain how immigration to this country was shaped by decisions that were intentionally designed to allow just certain kind of people in and exclude others. In the early 20th century in particular, Ari Zolberg talked about a process that he called remote control. And it had to do with the introduction of passports and consulates in countries overseas, so that people didn't just simply get on a boat like Donald Trump's grandfather, Frederick, for example, who landed at Castle Garden in 1885 as a 16-year-old barber's apprentice. He didn't have to apply for a visa or anything like that. But with the introduction of the tool of the passport and consulates, people had to apply overseas, and they had to be vetted and checked and so on, and then given permission to. And the passport was a tool that allowed control, hence remote control. You didn't wait till they got to Ellis Island or to Castle Garden. By then it was too late, they were already here. You can hold them on the other side. Now, think about artificial intelligence. AI doesn't get to have a passport. AI can cross borders without any kind of control, remote or not. The kinds of potential scenarios that you can conjure with AI in a world of international migration is almost beyond my ability to imagine it at this moment. But that is among the things that, in fact, Alejandro and I were just talking about AI on the way here, walking to the event, and I was telling him about the kinds of things that I've witnessed in my campus of 37,000 students, where everybody seems to be speeding by in all these powered scooters and boards of every kind that are motorized, as well as little robots that are going around from one end of the campus to another with antennas, bringing stuff from one building to another. I'd never seen anything like this, and it just happened like the other day, it seems like, but that's small potatoes compared to what's coming. In a city on the edge, like Miami, on the edge of getting flooded by rising seas, the issue of climate change is particularly upfront. Your own art has focused attention on the whole issue of climate change. Southern California is no piker either when it comes, and all of California, when it comes to fires and all the rest of the biblical disasters that we seem to get on a seemingly regular basis. So these are among the things I mentioned in my few minutes, how so much that has happened in Immigrant America and in the larger world was simply unpredictable and unimaginable during the time that we were writing each of these editions. We are constantly being ambushed by the unexpected, and the ironies of history are something that have always been with us. But the kinds of ambushes that you speak about with AI and climate change are a whole other level. It's like a quantum leap in challenges.
Alejandro, please.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to complement what Ruben mentioned in answer to, in reference to your question, to say the following. the advent of artificial intelligence as well as other high-tech innovations that are transforming our lives is also bifurcated, and it affects immigrants in a bifurcated sort of way. It's not the case that newcomers, that immigrants are necessarily clueless about the new innovations and victims of the past. Immigrants today are found at both ends of the hourglass. There are many immigrants whose high level of human capital, that is education and so on, and in great numbers, are among the engineers and the programmers and the innovators that are bringing about this change in our world. And at the other end, there are immigrants coming with low levels of education to meet the labor needs, the manual labor needs of an economy that has gone this. So immigration, like the American labor market itself, and like the economy, has become increasingly bifurcated in a way that will make gainers and losers, victimizers and victimized, that as Ruben mentioned, that is, we do not know what will happen in the future, but we can see the contours, at least of this pattern in which that is, immigrants are found at both ends of the economy and labor market at present.
And then I'll just say a word about where we're hoping that this work and Professor Portes's contributions to the Institute will continue in so many ways. One of the ideas that we've discussed is to think about more emerging city analysis, probably in the context of our Hemispheric University Consortium. So we're hoping that we will be able to cobble together the resources that are required to add in a few cities to that incredibly important analysis that we've seen in previous work. That's speaking more to where I see our work with and on Professor Portes, but of course closely related in so many ways, emerging cities and the issues of migration and climate. Were there any other questions, thoughts, comments? And then, of course, Alejandro, if you'd like to suggest other ways that you think that work is going to go forward, we are more than open. So I think what is then left, as I said, this is our final event of the 2023-2024 academic year, to thank again Jeff, Michael, Dory, and others who have done so much work to make these events happen, to make these events possible. So very, very grateful for all of your work, one on each side of you. Thank you very much for everything you've done to make this possible. And one of the things that they've made possible, of course, is a lovely wine and cheese reception outside. And the only thing stopping us from going right over there is to thank our speakers, those who are from home, those who have come, migrated across at least states in order to come and be with us. And of course, Professor Portes, who we hold so very dear at this university and in our institute, and without whom we could not have done all that we've done at the Institute and for this great university. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Oh, and there are books outside, of course, which you'll see.
You want us to stand up? On one condition. Send us a copy. You want all four?
Beg your pardon? As much dinner as I'll have, yeah. But I think you should hold the book, Alejandro.
strategic side, because a lot of things are going to happen right here. It is people look at New York and just is elaborate what is likely to happen in the future.
So much more interesting than so many other places in the United States. So much more interesting than New York or Los Angeles or any of those places.
Everybody writes about New York, what's happening